Hello, welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video, I'm very excited because we are going to be covering the Warlock from our UA playtest Packet 5 here. So we're almost at the end. We've got Warlock in this video, we've got Wizard coming up, and assuming that Wizard's the coach ever does Monk, I guess we'll do Monk, but nobody cares about Monk, so that's fine. But as most of you know, Warlock is my favorite class in the game. As I would say, it's my favorite. It's not the best, but it is my favorite. And I saw a lot of hate initially when this came up, and I have to think after reading through it a couple times that I think people just didn't delve deep enough into it. Yes, there's a few things that have gotten nerfed that aren't as good, but overall I actually think that the changes are pretty positive. So, I don't know, maybe I just will have a slightly different opinion than a lot of other people, and that's fine. But anyways, let's jump into the Warlock and where I think that it's mostly good news, So anyways, we will look at the design notes here. So medium armor is now included in the class armor training to give you better support for Warlocks who walk a melee-oriented path. Before we only had light armor, although I will point out that our armor training here shows light armor and medium armor, but we do not have shields as an option. So kind of good, but not a solid win. Anyways, Pact Boon has moved from 3rd level to 1st level. It now gives you Eldritch Blast, Hex, and a spell of your choice from Group of 3, all of which are now exclusive to Warlocks. The spell you choose is connected to the spellcasting ability choice you then make. The spells incorporate the previous functionality of the 3 Pact options. So, I like that Eldritch Blast and Hex are both now just part of the Warlock class. They're both always kind of distinctive Warlock abilities anyways. So that's good. I will also note, so they say here that it's been moved from 3rd to 1st level, which is true. But part of that is because your subclass has now been moved from 1st to 3rd because, of course, they're trying to standardize all that. And I'm not the biggest fan of this move. I totally understand it. I get that, they've decided that 3rd level is when everybody chooses a subclass now. It does prevent a lot of the weird things we saw before where some classes got a subclass at 1st level or 2nd level, and then most got them at 3rd. It prevents things like, say, dipping 1 level of Hexblade only so that you can attack with Charisma and then going all the rest of the way with, like, Paladin or whatever, right? Now you'd have to, presumably take 3 levels if you wanted Hexblade. But I will point out the Pact of the Blade is now 1st level ability, so I don't know if that changed really much. But anyways, in general, I liked the fact that there were these little differences between the classes. So standardizing things isn't always my favorite solution, but it does make things more balanced. And the fact that they moved the Pact boons to 1st level, to me, is still pretty significant. It means the Warlocks are getting something at level 1, and we're getting our subclass at level 3, just like everybody else. So, Pact Magic. This is one of the biggest changes. Pact Magic has been replaced by spellcasting. The most requested change to Warlocks has been for them to be able to use their spell slots more often. They therefore now cap out at 15 spell slots instead of 4. So as we all know, Warlocks used to have their own unique system of magic, where your 1st to 5th level spells were called Pact Magic. They were charged on a short rest instead of a long rest, and you had way less spell slots available. Now, technically, if you took a lot of short rests in the day, and let's say you were high enough to cast 5th level spells, you could actually be dropping way more 5th level spells than anybody else in the party. But that wasn't really the norm. And let's say you were in a big fight and you only had 2 or 3 spell slots available for the entire, short rest period. You couldn't just be like throwing out spells every round like a wizard or a sorcerer or a bard, or any other full caster for that matter, right? Let's not discriminate against the clerics and druids and whatnot. But you know what I'm saying. If you had 2 spell slots, then you, at most, are casting 2 spells, So, I get it, but again, this is another one where I kind of liked the uniqueness. Now, don't be wrong, this is definitely a buff, in my opinion. Warlocks had like spellcasting for warlocks was just worse. Pact magic was straight up worse than what like wizards and sorcerers had. It just was. But it was also unique, and that was one of the things I liked about it. You know, again, we've lost some of the uniqueness in favor of balance. I get it, but you know, for most people who aren't me, this is probably a good thing, right? It means that warlocks are just better than they used to be, and for somebody who wanted to play a warlock and not multi-class out at level 2 or 1, you know, this is a good thing. So, you know, overall, I think this is a positive change. Even though I have, like, I guess, philosophical issues with it, it's overall an improvement. Anyways, Eldritch Invocations now caps out at 9 invocations rather than 8. This is technically a buff, but Mystic Arcanum has now become an Eldritch Invocation, so instead of getting those 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells for free, you now have to spend your invocations on them, which means that even though you technically have one more invocation, if you wanted to take the full complement of spellcasting, you're going to end up with less invocations. But it also means you don't have to take them if you don't want to. I don't know why you wouldn't, though. We all know spellcasting at high levels especially is just, you know, way better than not spellcasting, let's be honest. Anyways, Contact Patron is a new level feature, allowing the warlock to contact the patron directly. I love this feature. I've always been a big fan of the concept that your patron is almost like an extra NPC in the campaign. Like the idea that people would treat warlock the same as, say, like a sorcerer or a wizard. It's just, you know, with slightly different class abilities and slightly different spell lists, or in Warlock's case, inferior spell list, but that's okay. You know, I hate that attitude. One class getting their magic from some sort of like divine lineage, in the case of, you know, like, Divine Soul Sorcerer or some of those other ones, or some sort of like draconic lineage or whatever, but something tied to their blood, that should not play out the same as somebody who made a pact with some sort of extra planar entity for power. You know, like those are very different ways of acquiring power. And to me, they shouldn't play the same. And I love the fact that you can now contact your patron once a day at 11th level, and, you know, it's like this extra source of information. I know a lot of times DMs are afraid of this kind of stuff, but personally I love it, because I have times when my players get stuck, but I don't want to, like, give them hints or tell them what to do. But when my players have options, even if they don't remember it, I could maybe be like, oh hey, like you could contact your patron or whatever, right? Or hopefully they remember it, I don't have to prompt them. But it gives the players these kind of resources where someone's like, oh well, you know, they're looking at their spell sheet, they're looking at their character sheet, they're trying to figure out what to do, and they go, wait, what if I cast Contact of the Plane? And you're like, thank goodness, I can finally give these guys some direction and get them back on course again, you know? And so, like I said, a lot of DMs are afraid of these kind of spells, but personally I like them because it's a nice way of me introducing new subplots or getting them back onto the main plot or giving them information they've otherwise missed. Anyways, Hexmaster is a new 11th level feature. Eldritch Master has been removed since it was based on Pact Magic, and as we already said, Pact Magic has been removed. Epic Boon is a new 20th level feature that increases an ability score, raises that score's maximum to 30, and gives an epic boon feat. So, you know, basically the same as everybody else gets 20, you get your boon, and you get 2 to, you know, whatever is added. Anyways, when we look at the basics, most of it is unchanged. We still have our D8 hit points, we've still got Wisdom and Charisma saves. I believe the skill choices are exactly the same. I didn't look over originally, but those look the same. But we still got simple weapons only, unless, you know, subclasses may determine otherwise, but that's what we default with. We've got no tools. The armored training is different, as already mentioned, but we've already discussed that. So multi-classing and a warlock. Used to be you needed 13 charisma or higher to multi-class in or out of warlock. But now, warlocks actually have a choice of different ability scores. So you could use Wisdom, Intelligence, or Charisma depending on what path you choose. So that's going to make more sense in a second here. But, you know, more options is better than less, you know? So I like this. It also means that if you did want to multi-class into like wizard or druid or cleric or some of these other casters, charisma might not matter suddenly, right? You could choose a pack that uses intelligence or wisdom as a casting stat and double up on those classes instead, which really just means that warlocks should remain one of the best choices for multi-classing in the game, in my opinion. Anyways, spell slots are going to work differently because before we had pack magic, which was its own separate entity. So if you multi-classed with, say, sorcerer, you would have your sorcerer spell slots as determined by the sorcerer table, and then you would have your pact slots as determined by the warlock table. Unlike everybody else, where you'd take, if you were a half caster, you'd get half your spell casting levels, rounded down, right? If you were a full caster, they got combined, etc. But now you're just getting half your warlock levels rounded up to the appropriate levels of the other class to determine your spell slots available for casting spells, etc. So you're really more of a half caster, but I do think that's very deceiving. I've heard a lot of people online already complaining that warlocks are just a straight up half caster now. It's yeah, but you do have Mystic Arcanum. You just have to use invocations for them. So, where a paladin is never going to have higher than 5th level spell slots if they're a pure paladin, the warlock still will if he chooses to spend his invocations on that. So, the idea that they're a straight up half caster like paladins or rangers isn't really true. And honestly, warlocks were never a full caster anyways. They were more like a 3/4 caster where you kind of had 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells. You had one choice from each level, and that was it. Anyways, let's get into the actual class features. So at level 1, you're going to get your pact boon. As we already mentioned, this used to be a level 3 choice, now it's level 1. So you get Eldritch Blast and Hex spells prepared, and you choose one of the following boons: Pact of the Blade, Pact of the Chain, or Pact of the Tome. Hopefully we'll get the Pact of the Talisman added in. I was really hoping that they would just add it in with this playtest, because they've done that with some other stuff where they took things from Tasha's or Xanathar's or whatever, mostly Tasha's, and just built it into the updated UA, right? But we're back to our base 3 choices that were in the player's handbook. We do not have Pact of the Talisman listed. Anyways, one thing to notice though is that each of these packs gives us a spellcasting ability choice. So Blade will give us Wisdom or Charisma, Chain gives us Intelligence or Charisma, and Tome gives us Intelligence or Wisdom. And then we get a different pact spell, either Pact Weapon, Pact Familiar, or Book of Shadows, depending on which one we chose. So for our spellcasting, we basically are just like regular casters at this point, right? We're going to get spells back on a long rest. We've got choices, from the arcane table. We're not really restricted to which ones we can choose, which is a big boost for warlocks in my opinion, because even though warlocks had a pretty decent spell table, it was one of the worst among arcane casters, right? It was pretty decent compared to some of the other classes, but it was not as good as, maybe it was as good as Bard, but Bard had magical secrets allowing them to make better choices. But it was not as good as Wizard or Sorcerer. And now you just have the Arcane spell list, right? So you have the same options that Wizards and Sorcerers have, which is a major bonus in my opinion. And of course now you have a variable spellcasting ability too, right? So that's also quite nice. You can change your prepared spells whenever you gain a Warlock level. You can replace one spell on your list with another Arcane spell for which you have the spell slots. Eldritch Invocations. So this was always one of my favorite things about Warlocks in 5th edition, is that it was like this extra ability that nobody really else had that allowed you to just change and customize your class even further. So for most people, you've got a subclass, and if you have feats allowed in your campaign, which most do, right? But, assuming you had feats, you could customize your character that way through feats as well, right? Obviously, your fighter, your Battle Master fighter and somebody else's Battle Master fighter weren't the same, right? If you went Polearm Mastery and Great Weapon Mastery, and he went Crossbow Expert and Sharpshooter, even though you were the same class, even though you were the same subclass, those two characters played remarkably different. You know, spellcasters had the option of choosing different types of spells. Maybe you want to go with more damaging spells, or more crowd control spells, or more buffs or debuffs. Or maybe you want to take a decent mix of all of them, right? But those give you different ways of customizing a character. But then Warlock, not only do you have all those choices we've already discussed, but then you also had invocations, and you could take different ones that were like, some of them were dependent on your specific pact, right? So Pact of the Chain got different options, Pact of the Blade got other options, right? But some of them just gave you things like, say, different spells, like Alter Self, or Conjure Elemental, or whatever else it was, right? And again, it just gave you different ways to customize your character. It could give you things like super, like Devil Sight, which gave you basically super dark vision, you know. And these are just interesting options. And I liked it quite a bit. I'm glad to see that those still remain. And, you know, basically the chart remains mostly the same, but we do cap out at 9 instead of 8. We're starting with our 2 right at level 2, though. And, you know, we're getting our 3rd at level 5, which is the same as before. So generally the early levels will remain mostly untouched. There are some other interesting things to note, though. So, before it says, okay, so if it has a prerequisite, you must meet the prerequisite, obviously. When you gain certain Warlock levels, you gain more invocations, as shown by the Warlock table. Oh, here we go. So if it, oh no, this is what I wanted right here. Whenever you gain a Warlock level, you can choose one of the invocations you know and replace it with another invocation for which you qualify. Or if the invocation, such as Mystic Arcanum, involves choice, you can replace the invocation with itself, but make a different choice. And this is kind of big, because before, with your Mystic Arcanum, let's say you had a 6th level spell, right? And you chose, I don't know, we'll say Eye Bite. So that was your 6th level spell. It was the only one you had, and that's what you could use. But now you could replace it with a different one if you want. You could even change out the Arcanum, so if you don't want 6th level spells, which frankly you should want 6th level spells if they're available, let's be honest. Higher level spell casting in this game is insanely good. But let's say you didn't, for whatever choice, you could swap it out. Or if later you're like, man, what was I thinking, not taking high level spells? That was a terrible decision. I'm going to replace this thing with high level spells. You know, you can do that. And, you know, again, there's more options is better. So at 3rd level now we get our subclass. I mean, we used to get this at 1st level, but like I said, everything's moving towards like standardization, which is less creative, but is more balanced. So I understand where they're coming from. Anyway, so in this playtest, we get the Fiend Patron, but you know, whatever one you wanted to play, right? Level 4, we're getting a feat like everybody else. Level 5, we're getting an invocation. Level 6, we're getting a subclass feature, just like everybody else. 7, though, we're getting another invocation. 8, we're getting a feat. 9, an invocation. 10, subclass features, like everybody else. 11, contact patron. So in the past, you've usually contacted your patron through intermediaries. Now you can communicate directly. You always have the contact other plane spell prepared. With this feature, you can cast a spell without expending a spell slot to contact your patron, and you automatically succeed on the spell's saving throw. Once you cast a spell with this feature, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. So here are some interesting things to think about. Before, Warlocks were pretty limited in their spell casting abilities. But now we're getting Eldritch Blast for free, we're getting Hex for free, and I mean those are both low level, right? A cantrip and a 1st level spell. But now we're getting Contact Other Plane for free. So let's take a quick look at Contact Other Plane. So that's a casting time of 1 minute, duration of 1 minute. Whatever. You know, whatever. It actually has a ritual tag, of course, as we can see. So being able to cast it without expending a spell slot. For most classes, that wouldn't be a big deal, but Warlocks don't have ritual casting, so just having the ritual tag wouldn't have helped you as a Warlock. So, you know, not being able to expend it, or not having to expend a spell slot does come in handy. This isn't the kind of thing where you're like, but who cares? It's a ritual spell anyway. I wouldn't have to expend a spell slot. Well, you would on a Warlock. But anyways, you mentally contact a demigod, spirit of a long dead sage, or some other mysterious entity from another plane. Now, in this case, we're specifically only able to use this to contact our patron. Otherwise, you got to cast the spell regularly, right? So that part doesn't really apply. It's whatever your patron is. Contacting this extraplanar intelligence can strain or even break your mind. When you cast a spell, make a DC 15 intelligence saving throw. On a failure, you take 6d6 psychic damage and are insane until you finish a long rest. While insane, you can't take actions, can't understand what other creatures say, can't read, and only speak in gibberish. A greater restoration of the spell cast on you ends its effect, as does the long rest we've already mentioned, right? But like I said, you automatically pass the saving throw, so you don't have to worry about any of this. And you know, not being able to take actions is kind of a big deal. I mean, it's all a big deal, but not being able to take actions is, you know, crippling, obviously. So not having to worry about the saving throw makes this spell awesome. It's just free information for you every day. Anyways, on a successful save, you can ask the entity up to 5 questions. You must ask your questions before the spell ends, and don't forget it only lasts a minute, so it's not like you can sit there for 45 minutes at your table, brainstorming with all your buddies. You know, that's the kind of stuff you're supposed to do before you cast a spell. Anyways, and you should do it in 40 minutes. Come on, be considerate of other people's time. The GM answers each question with one word, such as yes, no, maybe, never, irrelevant, or unclear, if the entity doesn't know the answer to the question. If a one-word answer would be misleading, the GM might instead offer a short phrase as an answer. Now, personally, I think that should say should, not might, because most GMs, when they read that, they're just like, we'll go with misleading. But, you know, this is your patron. He's supposed to be there to help you, you know? You're trying to help him. He's trying to help you. It's a symbiotic relationship. Why is he trying to mislead you? Bad patron. Bad patron. Anyways. We're also getting Eldritch Invocation. As you notice, we get a lot of invocations. One every second level. Anyways. Level 12, we're getting a feat like everybody else. 13, we're getting another invocation. 14, we're getting our final subclass feature, just like everybody else. And at 15, we're getting another invocation. At 16, we're getting a feat. 17, we get nothing. And at 18, we get Hexmaster. You've mastered the dread application of the hexes, allowing you to cast the hex spell without expending a spell slot. I don't find this terribly exciting. It's a first level spell. You should have a lot better than that by 18th level. But, you know, it is an extra spell slot. If you were still limited in the number of spell slots you could cast to, you know, only a handful per short rest like you were before, then this would be actually pretty welcome, right? If you only had, like, say, 3 or 4 spell slots, and you're like, yeah, okay, well, I'll take a free one, you know, for Hex. Sure, why not? But, you know, I'm one of these people who kind of, I love Hex at low levels, but I don't usually cast it at high levels much because there's just, you know, it uses my concentration, and there's just so many great, really powerful spells to concentrate on. Not that it's still not a good damage boost, especially if you've got a lot of attacks, like, say, Eldritch Blast, you know. But just in general, I don't know. It's not like this feature's terrible. I just not really terribly excited about it. Anyways, level 19, we're getting a feat. Level 20, we're getting our epic boon, of course. So, our invocation options. So, here's a summary of the main changes to the invocation options. Beguiling Influence has been replaced by lessons of the first ones, which has been used to take the skilled feat or another eligible feat. Bewitching Whispers has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Book of Ancient Secrets is absorbed by the new Book of Shadows spell and the Warlock's new spellcasting feature. Chains of Carceria has been replaced by the Mystic Arcanum, which is kind of too bad because Chains of Carceria was, or Carceria, whoever pronounced, is amazing. I remember thinking at one point, like, man, all 15, this thing's like, you know, hold monster, like, sure, it's nice, but they get a saving throw. I don't know how much I'd ever use it. And then you get a warlock to those kind of levels, and you're dealing with lots of fiends and fae and other things like that, and you're just like, how did I ever live without this thing? It turned out to be amazing. Anyways, Dreadful Word has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Eyes of the Runekeeper now clarifies that it doesn't decode secret messages. Never said it did originally, but whatever. Favor of the Chainmaster is a new invocation that enhances Pact of the Chain. Gaze of Two Minds is now usable as a bonus action rather than action, and it no longer applies blinded and deafened conditions to you, and allows you to cast spells from your space or the other creature's space. Finally, it now requires 5th level. Overall, though, huge boost to Gaze of Two Minds, which was always a cool idea, but was just not very good the way it was designed before. Much, much, much better now. Anyways, Gift of the Protector is imported from the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Fine. Hex is a new invocation that enhances Hex. Lessons of the first ones is a new invocation that allows the Warlock to dabble in different areas, giving a little more versatility. Life Drinker now requires 9th level rather than 12th level. It deals 1d6 extra damage, and it heals you. So before it was your charisma bonus and damage, which was a lot more reliable for damage, right? Like, especially if you had a +5 charisma bonus, that's obviously a lot better on average than a d6. But it now heals you, which frankly fits the theme of life drinking a lot better. So I feel like it is pretty nice. Minions of Chaos has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Fire of the Mind has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Mystic Arcanum is now an Eldritch invocation that is available starting at 5th level rather than 11th level. Impelling Blast now works on creatures that are large or smaller. Probably need a change, to be honest. Sculptor of Flesh has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Sign of Veil Omen has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Thief of Five Fates has been replaced by Mystic Arcanum. Thirsting Blade has been absorbed by the new Pact Weapon spell. Voice of the Chainmaster has been absorbed by the new Pact Familiar spell. And Witch Sight now gives you True Sight, which frankly it should have always done to begin with. So anyways, Agonizing Blast, basically remaining the same. Armor of Shadows, Mage Armor yourself, target spelling space slot, or spell slot, or material component, the same. Senate Step, you can cast Levitate on yourself, target spelling a spell slot, or using opponents. Beast Speech, yeah, you can cast speech with animals. Devil Sight, non-magical, and Magical Darkness. Elder Sight, you can cast Detect Magic on a spell slot. Elder Spear increases your Elder Blast range to 300 feet. You've got the Eyes of the Rune Keeper, as it says it doesn't detect secret messages, which, I don't know. Whatever. Favor of the Chainmaster. Prerequisite. 9th level Warlock or higher. Pact of the Chain feature. Your bond is familiar is now summoned. It goes more powerful. Whenever the familiar hits with its Eldritch Strike, the target experiences the following effect associated with each creature's type. Aberration. Slowing Slime. So that's movement speed reduced. And it can't take the dash or disengage actions. Celestial Guiding Light. Against the target has advantage, and if the target has invisible condition, that condition is suppressed for the duration. Dragon, you get Draconic Might. If it's medium or small, it has the prone condition. Fae, Beguiling Sting. The target has a charmed condition until the end of your next turn and perceives both you and your familiar as the charmer. So, quite nice. Fiend, unnoticeably toxic. The target has the poison condition until the end of your next turn. The poison condition is one of the most commonly resisted or immune conditions in the entire game, but it's also incredibly powerful. So I like this quite a bit. And things like resistance, it doesn't really help against this. Resistance is good for countering poison damage. This just gives it the poison condition. So I like that one quite a bit. Undead, Whispers of the Grave. Target has a frightened condition till the end of your next turn. You choose whether the target is frightened of you or the familiar. So it's not like the Charmed one where it's both, but again, frightened condition, quite good. All these abilities are fairly powerful. Prone is probably one of the weaker ones, to be honest. Although it can be really powerful in the moment, right? It's just the thing can stand up again. But, if you've got lots of people attacking with melee attacks, and they all get advantage, that can translate into some huge damage. But I really like the Charmed condition, the Poison condition, and the Frightened condition. The only disadvantage of those is that they also tend to run into immunities a lot more often, right? A lot of things end up being immune to those, especially at higher levels. Still, quite powerful effects. Fiendish Vigor, you can cast False Life on yourself without expending a spell slot. This one was always great at second level. 3rd level, and not much use beyond that. Anyways, Keys of Two Minds, we already touched on that one. It's now a bonus action, and you no longer disable yourself while you're using it. So, very nice. Gift of the Protectors. A new page appears in your Book of Shadows. Oh yeah, so prerequisite 9th level or higher, and Book of the Tome, or Pact of the Tome feature. So, new page appears in your Book of Shadows when you conjure it with your permission. A creature can use this action to write its name on that page, and you can obtain a number of names equal to proficiency bonus. When any creature whose name is on the page produces 0 hit points but not killed outright, the creature magically drops to 1 hit point instead. Once this magic is triggered, no creature can benefit from it until you finish a long rest. As a magic action, you can erase the name on the page by touching it. Yeah, I like it. Basically just a party-wide, death ward. Nothing wrong with that. Hexer, when you cast Hex, its range is 600 feet, and you have advantage on any Constitution saving throw you make to maintain your concentration on the spell. I felt like the range on Hex was already decent enough, but, especially if you're using something like Eldritch Spear and you're trying to Eldritch Blast things from, 1.5 miles away, then this could be pretty handy. And if the only thing you're really concentrating a lot on is Hex, you might not want to take Warcaster or something like that. Maybe you just don't feel it's worth the feat investment, right? In which case, this is probably a lot easier because, if you have 9 invocations and only, say, 4 feet, then, it's a lot easier to give up one of your Eldritch invocations. Overall, though, I think that outside of specific builds where you're trying to hit things from, super far away, I find personally the range on Hex is probably sufficient. And if I'm planning on casting a lot of other spells, which these days you might because you've got a decent number of spells knowing, taking Warcaster is probably not a bad idea. Anyway, lessons from the first ones. You've received knowledge from an elder entity of the multiverse, allowing you to gain 1 feat of your choice, such as Skilled, that is available to first level characters and the lacks prerequisites. Quite nice. You're still limited in the choices, but it is a feat. Nothing wrong with that. Anyways, Life Drinker, 9th level or higher, Pact of the Blade. When you hit a creature with the weapon of your Pact weapon spell, the creature takes an extra 1d6 necrotic damage. In addition, the first time you deal necrotic damage with this invocation on each of your turns, you gain a number of hit points equal to the necrotic damage dealt. So, like I said, damage-wise, it's not as high as it used to be, right? But it does have the, life-drinking leech component to it. Now, notice that only takes... so every time you hit them with your weapon, they're taking the necrotic damage, but it's only the first time you deal the necrotic damage with this invocation that you gain hit points back. So if you attack twice, hit both times, you're doing the 2d6 damage, but you're only gaining, the first d6 of hit points. Anyways, Mask of Many Faces, cast Disguise Self without expanding a spell slot, unchanged. Master of Myriad Forms, you can cast Alter Self without expanding a spell slot. Requires you to be 15th level or higher. Misty Visions, you can cast out an image with expanding a spell slot. Anyways, Mystic Arcanum. This is one of the biggest changes, and it's definitely worth talking about. So, 5th level or higher instead of 11th like it used to be. Your explorations of the Arcane have unlocked magic within you. Choose one spell from the Arcane list that has a spell level for which you qualify, as shown on the Mystic Arcanum table. Look for your Warlock level on the table to see if you can use it, whatever, right? It's repeatable. You can take this invocation more than once. Each time you do so, the spell gain maybe if it's level 1 you chose them. So we've got a chart here with our Warlock level, right? And showing the max spell level you can choose with that Arcanum. And of course, at 17th or higher level, we can still get a 9th level spell. But it also means that we can grab more 3rd, 4th, and 5th level spells too, which we could never do before, right? Anyways, overall, I like this quite a bit. It does make us a lot better at spell casting than we were before, potentially. Which is one thing that I think a lot of people seem to have kind of overlooked. I've seen so many people saying that warlocks are just a straight up half caster now, and that they're like somehow worse at casting spells than they were before. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, you got way more spell slots than you used to have. You've got options of adding more spells to your spell list. I don't know. I don't know where they're coming from. It's like they just skipped this entire section or something. Who knows? One with shadows. When you're in an area of dim light or darkness, you can use your action to have the invisible condition until you move, take an action, a bonus action, or a reaction. Never been a big fan of this one. Still not a big fan of it. It's like, oh hey, I can turn invisible until I, move or do anything. Great. Anyways, Otherworldly Leap, prerequisite at 9th or higher. You can cast Jump on yourself without expending a spell slot using material components. I don't know. If Jump was a 5th level spell, this might be exciting, but it's really not. Anyways, Repelling Blast. This creature's large size or smaller. Hit it with a large blast. You can push it horizontally up to 10 feet straight away from you. I like that they added horizontally because you'd sometimes get these things where people would be like knocking stuff up into the air and then letting them take falling damage. They're like, no, horizontally, not vertically. You're like, darn it. Vision of Distant Realms. 15th level or higher. You can cast Arcane Eye without expending spell slot. I've mentioned this before, but I quite like that. I use a lot of scouting type stuff in some of my games. Not all the time, but if I have a DM that allows me to abuse things like scouting for free, I will abuse it. Anyways, Whispers of the Grave, 9th level or higher. You can cast Speak of Dead without expending a spell slot. Witch Sight, 15th level or higher. You have True Sight with a range of 30 feet. Yeah, True Sight is awesome. So, this subclass. Now, of course, like I said, in this one they give us a Fiend Patron. I've always liked the Fiend Patron. I think that it's one of the more underrated Warlock subclasses. And honestly, it is just straight up better in this, which is really nice. So anyways, we've got our prepared spells, we've got free casting, and we've got the spells added to our Warlock spell list. So let's make this a little larger. So before, for Warlocks, every subclass had patron spells, but these spells were not automatically added to your spell list. These were just like, given the incredibly limited number of choices you already had, you will now have 2 extra choices of each of these levels, but no extra choices to make them with. They also capped out at 5th level spells, right? 9th level. Whereas now we've got choices at 13th and 17th. And yeah, okay, they're all 5th level or lower spells, but the fact is, I like that they've kind of spread it out a little longer, and they've given us, all these spells added to your spell list. I saw somebody complaining on YouTube that Fireball is no longer on the Fiend Patron spell list, but Warlocks now have access to the entire Arcane school, which includes Fireball. So, and for anybody who's like, oh yeah, but, now they have to use one of their spell slots on Fireball. You already had to do that. As I just mentioned, you didn't get the Warlock ones for free. You just got them added as new options. And there's some pretty good spells on here, like Scorching Ray is pretty good for direct damage if you want a nice direct damage spell. Suggestion's awesome. Fear's awesome. Wall of Fire is pretty good. Flame Strike is garbage, but what do you do, right? Overall, pretty solid list. You are getting these spells later than normal, right? Like Burning Hands is a 1st level spell. You could have had it 1st level if you were, not doing this. You're getting it 3rd, right? Scorching Ray, you could have had it 3rd instead of getting it 5th. Fear, you could have had it 5th, you're getting it 9th, right? So you kind of have progression similar to the half casters in this regard, but it's still better than it used to be because now you're getting those spells automatically. And granted, each patron is probably going to have their own spell list, so that's okay. Either way, it's better than it was. Darkness Blessing. When you reduce an enemy to 0 hit points, or an enemy drops to 0 hit points within 5 feet of you, you gain temporary hit points equal to spellcasting ability modifier plus your warlock level. So it used to be, if you dropped an enemy to 0 hit points, you regained them equal to charisma mod plus your warlock level. So now it's, whatever your spellcasting ability is, maybe charisma, maybe not, right? And anything that gets reduced to 0 hit points within 5 feet of you. Now, granted, this isn't going to be particularly useful, probably, if you're not playing like a Pact of the Blade Warlock, right? If you're standing back and casting stuff, you're not going to be getting a lot of kills from your allies with the enemies within 5 feet of you. But it doesn't say that on ones you kill, right? It's only if, when you reduce an enemy to 0 hit points, doesn't matter about the range on that one, or an ally drops one to 0 hit points within 5 feet of you. So, overall, it's just straight up better, because now you can benefit from allies dropping things as well. It doesn't have to only be you. 6th level, Dark One's Own Luck. You can call on your fiendish patron to alter fate in your favor. When you make an ability check or a saving throw, you can use this feature to add a d10 to the roll. You can do so after seeing the initial roll, but before any of the roll's effects occur. You can use this feature a number of times. You go to spellcasting ability modifier minimum once, and you gain all uses when you finish a long rest. Again, this is just straight up better. It used to be based on like short rest, but it also meant that you could only use it like a once per combat, essentially, right? But now, if you got a +3 or +4 or +5, potentially +6, level 20, but whatever, right? That's a lot of D10s to be adding to different savings throws or ability checks. I always thought this ability was really great, and now it's even better because you can just use it more times in a combat. Anyways, level 10, Fiendish Resilience. Challenge the preternatural resilience of the fiends. You can choose one damage type other than force whenever you finish a short rest or a long rest. You gain resistance to that damage type until you choose a different one with this feature. Again, this is just better because it allows you to switch them out more often, because before, I believe it was a long rest, maybe I'm wrong. You can't choose force, but force is like one of the rarest damage types anyways, so that would have been a terrible choice. You probably want to pick like slashing, bludgeoning, something along those lines. Or if you were looking for a magical or elemental damage type, fire and cold tend to be the most popular, right? But honestly, it's pretty hard to go wrong with slashing and bludgeoning, since almost every monster will usually do one of those two. Sometimes piercing, but slashing and bludgeoning are a lot more common. Anyways, level 14, we get our final ability, and this is one that I absolutely love. This is one of my favorite Warlock subclass abilities. I've talked about this one in previous videos. Hurl Through Hell. This is just an amazing ability. So anyways, when you hit a creature with an attack roll, you can use this feature to instantly transport the target through the lower planes. The creature disappears and hurtles through a nightmare landscape. At the end of your next turn, the target returns to the space it previously occupied, or the nearest unoccupied space. If the target is not a fiend, you must make a wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC upon its return. On a failed save, the target takes 10 die 10 psychic damage. On a successful one, it takes half as much. So it didn't used to get a save, it was just straight up 10 die 10 damage. But the thing that was so great about it before, and still remains, is that there's no saving throw against it. Like against the initial banishment. You make an attack roll. If that attack roll lands, you banish that thing for one turn. This was the main ability about it, was the fact that you had a crowd control effect, was no saving throw, which means that legendary saves, magic resistance, none of that stuff helps, right? And then on top of that, you had a bunch of psychic damage when it came back. Now, granted, now it can save for half as much psychic damage, but psychic damage, well, very, very nice, isn't the selling feature. For me, it's the banishment with no saving throw. Anyways, once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest, unless you expand a spell slot of at least 4th level when you use it again. You can use this feature only once per turn. This is a huge improvement. So before, I already mentioned they didn't used to get a saving throw for half damage. But that's okay, because you can also only use it once per long rest. Now you can give up a 4th or higher level spell slot and use it again. And frankly, this is Like, this is way better than a banishment spell, which is a 4th level spell. I mean, yes, it doesn't potentially last as long as banishment, but the fact that there's no saving throw, like I said, you don't have to worry about legendary resist, you don't have to worry about anything. It's essentially like a maze spell for 1 round, you know, with damage on top of it. This is easily worth giving up a 4th or 5th level spell slot for, in my opinion. So that is the Warlock. Overall, I think the Path to the Fiend was always pretty good and looks even better in this playtest. And the Warlock in general, you know, like, my own personal misgivings about how I personally like the Path Magic system, even though it was worse. Setting aside that, the fact is the class is just stronger and better than it used to be. And yes, I get that if you want to use all these Eldritch invocations for more spells, it's not going to leave you with a lot of other invocations to choose from. But you don't have to use them all on spells. You could choose other invocations, you know. So that part is all fine. Overall, I think that it's just in a much, much better place. I should have looked at Eldritch Blast and Hex, but the truth is they remain mostly the same. We do have an issue with Hex when you upcast it. Extra damage increases to 2d6 now, and if you use a spell slot at 5th or higher level, the spell damage increases to 3d6. You know, that's kind of nice. You can only do the damage once per turn, though, whereas before Hex was just on every attack. So overall, if you're like a Path to the Blade Warlock and you're only making a couple attacks a round, the new Hex is actually better at higher levels, right? But if you were just using like Eldritch Blast a lot and you were hitting like 3 or 4 times per turn or per round, or turn, same thing essentially, then it's worse than it used to be. But, you know, overall, sorry, it's getting late. Overall, I don't mind the changes. I said we got the Path Familiar. Oh yeah, I should have gone through all the different Path Familiar. Oh, I guess we'll do that right now at the end of the video here. So Path Familiar is a casting time of 1 hour, range of 10 feet. You summon the entity, uses the Path Familiar stat block. I like that the Familiar is basically follows the same pattern we saw in Tasha's, where now basically all these summons are, you know, basically the same. Choose the different type you want though, and there's some minor differences. But this is a lot easier to use, because that doesn't mean you're constantly having to go through all the different source books, find, you know, the relevant monster, try to hum and haw over which differences are better or worse or whatever, right? So now you can get an aberration, celestial, a dragon, a fae, a fiend, or an undead. So the Familiar is an ally to you and your companions, and it obeys you in combat. It shares your initiative roll, but it takes its turn immediately after yours. On its turn, the Familiar takes a dodge action to use its move to avoid danger unless you use your reaction to command it to attack instead. So, again, this is similar to what we've seen from the other classes, and it's better than what we had before, because before you kind of had to give up your action in order to get it to attack, which is never very satisfying. Now, if you give up your reaction, you might not have had much to do with the reaction anyway, right? And, you know, we've got the disappearance of Familiar. That's most of the same. We've got the remote viewing, because you can see through it, you know. We've got cantrip upgrades, so when you reach 5th level as Warlock, you can communicate telepathically with Familiar, as long as you two are on the same plane of existence, and while perceiving through your pet senses, you can also speak through your Familiar in your own voice. So we now have like more hit points though. Plus your Warlock level, the Familiar has a number of hit dice, d4 is equal to your Warlock level. I mean, before you had, like, the Imp was like the best choice, and it had 10 hit points. You know, now if you're a 10th level Warlock, your Imp has 15, which has done it a lot better, but at least it's something. Because before, anything that ever decided to attack your familiar just instantly died. Anyways, as I said before, a lot of the different types are mostly cosmetic, but the Eldritch Strike, the damage type does change based on the type you have, right? So Aberration is Acid, Celestial is Radiant, etc., etc. Obviously, Celestial with Radiant damage is very good because Radiant is very reliable. Fey with Psychic damage, also incredibly reliable. Acid's usually pretty good. Poison, we've already discussed poison, not necessarily the best. Necrotic, pretty good unless you're fighting like undead, in which case you could have trouble. Anyways, packed weapon. So you get your simple or martial melee weapon of your choice in your hand. You create a bond with a magic weapon you touch. Or you can create a magic bond with a weapon you touch. Sorry. The weapon you touch or conjure must lack the heavy property. If a spell fails, if you touch a magic item that is attuned to someone else. For the duration, the weapon grants you the following benefits. Eldritch Warrior. When you attack with the weapon, you can use your spellcasting ability modifier for attack and damage rolls instead of using strength or dexterity. So basically, the Hexblade ability built into packed weapon, which frankly probably always should have been. You have proficiency with the weapon, of course. Returning if the weapon has a thrown property, the weapon returns to your hand immediately after hitting or missing the target. It's worth noting that the weapon cannot have the heavy property. Before, it had to be a one-handed weapon, but at level, was it 3? Yeah, I believe so. You could choose to make it a two-handed weapon or a heavy weapon if you wanted. Now that's not really an option. Anyways, counterback upgrade. When you reach 5th level as a Warlock, you gain the extra attack feature for the conjured or magic weapon only. With that feature, you can attack twice with the weapon instead of once when you take the attack action on your turn. Anyways, with a Book of Shadows. I don't think I even saw. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, this is our final option here. So, we've got a casting of 1 hour, of course. You get Strands of Shadow. You can conjure forth a book in your hand. The book contains Eldritch magic that only you can access, granting you the following benefits. You get 2 cantrips and 2 first level spells that have the ritual tag. Spells can be from the Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell list, and they must be spells you don't already have prepared. While the book is on your person, you have this book chosen spells prepared. Spellcasting Focus. You can use a book as a spellcasting focus. It disappears if you cast the spell again or die. When you reach 5th or higher level of the Warlock, the spell also enhances other cantrips where the book is on your person. You can add your Warlock spellcasting ability modifier to the damage rolls of any cantrip you cast that doesn't already have that modifier added to its damage rolls. So in other words, no Eldritch Blast. It does not qualify. Still kind of interesting though. I do kind of miss the fact that before you really just had the ability to add basically any ritual spells you wanted, which in a long campaign could net you a lot of spells. But that doesn't seem to be an option anymore. However, overall, like I was saying, I think Book of Shadows might be slightly worse than it was, but better initially because now you get the first level spells as well, right? I think the other two are mostly better or even remained unchanged. Like the blade's mostly unchanged. Pact of the chain seems to be slightly better. More damage options, more hit points and armor class for familiars. You know, these things are generally better. They're not big improvements though. Like I said, like if you're 10th level and your familiar has 15 hit points instead of 10, he's still probably going to be getting one shot against anything you fight. But there is a chance that, you know, if he gets caught in an AoE and he makes a saving throw for half damage, he could live, right? And before that was pretty much an impossibility. So, you know, it is still better. And at least there's some scaling. that was the other problem is that we sometimes had, was that, you had the same familiar at level 18 as you had at, level 3 or whatever, right? So, some scaling being built in is very nice. Anyways, it's incredibly late, and I am very tired, so I am going to wrap things up here. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the Warlock. I think that there were some nerfs here and there. Like I said, I have some conceptual disagreements with some of the changes, but I think that a lot of those changes are actually better. I just think that, it makes things more uniform, which to me is less interesting. I like a lot of the little subtle differences, But for somebody who just wants to play a Warlock and wants to have fun with the character and wants the class to be as good as it can be, I feel like it's in a better place than it was before. I think that before, Warlock was a really popular class to take 1 to 2 levels of, sometimes more than that. But the reason people love to Warlock multi-class was because they either wanted things like Hexblade, or they wanted Eldritch Blast with Agonizing and probably Repelling Blast, And to me, I like the idea that your 20th level Warlock is actually better at casting Eldritch Blast than that 2-level Warlock, 18th level, Paladin or whatever, right? To me that makes sense. I like the fact that a lot of the Warlock spells and abilities, the Eldritch invocations and replacing all of our Mystic Arcanum, but they're like really good. Like the fact that I can still get my 7th, 8th, or 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spells. Those haven't gone away. I can even get some more low-level spells if that's what I want. I can still choose, from mostly the same invocations I wanted before. Like it's all still there. Plus, I have more spells available, and I don't know. To me, it just seems like it's better than it was before. So I was very surprised when I started reading through this. I actually read it a couple times because I was like, man, I don't understand where some of these people are coming from. But whatever. I personally like the new Warlock. I liked the old Warlock. Conceptually, I like that the class flavor still feels the same. In fact, I think it's even more emphasized with things like Contact Patron, giving you that ability to reach out and talk to your patron once a day, essentially risk-free because you automatically make the saving throw. This kind of stuff is really cool and neat for like role-playing, I guess I will say you do gain spells of new levels at a slower rate if you don't use Eldritch Invocations, because you have the basic spell progression of like a half caster. So I will say that if you don't want to use Eldritch Invocations to pick up extra spell slots, then I can see where some people might say that you're basically a half caster. But don't forget, you can use, you could have, you could have 5th level spells and then use this to take like those spell slots. So, there are some weird, funny combinations that you can do still. Overall, I think your base spell casting has mostly remained unchanged. Yes, your spell progression is worse, but you have more slots. But now you also have the option of improving that through invocations, which previously you couldn't. Most other things I think are pretty well balanced. And overall, I think the Warlock is in a pretty decent place. So, those are my thoughts on the class. Thank you for listening. I know this video got a little long. Holy crap, it's already 20 to 1. And happy Father's Day, because today was technically Father's Day. I mean, yesterday, technically, I guess, since it's 20 to 1. But, to all the dads out there, happy Father's Day. Anyways, thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, leave me your comments in the comment section, and I will see you next time.